Across 17 star systems and 43 inhabited worlds, the Vatheian education complex stood as the undisputed pinnacle of military excellence. Not self-proclaimed excellence, mind you, though the Vatheians certainly wouldn't have minded. According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Claiming it, but the sort of grudging, eye-rolling acknowledgement that even rival civilizations couldn't dispute after their own academies kept producing graduates who couldn't tell a plasma conduit from a waste extraction tube. The complex floated in perpetual orbit around Vatheian Prime, a crystalline station spanning 12 square kilometers of gleaming corridors, training facilities, and enough bureaucratic offices to make any governmental entity weep with envy. Its architecture screamed, "We take ourselves very seriously," in 17 different languages, including 2 that consisted entirely of bioluminescent color shifts. For 3,000 standard cycles, the complex had refined warfare into an art form. Not the messy, screaming, bleeding kind of warfare that actually happened when species decided diplomacy was too much paperwork. No, this was theoretical warfare, the kind practiced by beings who believed evolution had gifted them with superior strategic cognition, and therefore superior everything else. The ranking system made perfect sense to everyone who'd invented it. At the top perched the Vatheians themselves, naturally, followed by the crystalline Yethrim, whose transparent biology somehow made them more enlightened. Then came the telepathic Usuri, the quadrupedal Mrenthi with their 6-lobed brains, and descending down through 37 other species until you reached the category most instructors referred to as recently uplifted mammals with concerning attachment to projectile weapons. Humans had earned their spot at this illustrious institution roughly 4 cycles ago, shortly after their planet had been discovered engaging in what the Galactic Collective termed pre-warp societal chaos and what humans called Tuesday. The inclusion had been controversial. Several council members argued that a species still using chemical rockets and fission reactors wasn't ready for advanced military education. Others pointed out that these same primitives had somehow developed 47 different ways to deliver explosive payloads, and 3 distinct theories about attacking enemies from orbital positions, despite never having achieved sustainable orbital habitation. The compromise reached was typical of institutional logic everywhere. Admit humans to the program, but ensure they understood their place at the bottom of the sophistication hierarchy. Give them assignments nobody else wanted. Let them prove themselves through the sort of menial tasks that built character, or at least kept them too busy to contaminate the other cadets with their bizarre notions about guerrilla tactics and acceptable casualty rates. Which explained why Cadet Mitchell found himself standing in Sub-Level 7, Xenobiology Wing, Sector 12 Gamma, staring at a datapad that cheerfully informed him he'd been assigned to Predator Juvenile Containment and Behavioral Observation, babysitting duty. For alien bear cubs, the corridor smelled like industrial cleaner attempting to mask something organic and failing spectacularly. Fluorescent panels hummed overhead, casting everything in that peculiar shade of sterile environment, desperately pretending nothing ever goes wrong here. 3 levels above, his fellow cadets were probably practicing formation flying or learning exotic weapons systems. Mitchell got to spend the next 6 cycles monitoring whether large carnivorous infants had adequate enrichment activities. The human arrives punctually. The voice emerged from everywhere and nowhere, which meant it belonged to Instructor Vatheian, an Usuri whose telepathic presence felt like someone reading over your shoulder while you tried to concentrate. How refreshingly primitive. Your species does understand linear time. Mitchell didn't sigh. Sighing would have been unprofessional, and he'd promised himself he'd last at least 1 full cycle before getting ejected from the most prestigious military academy in known space. Reporting as assigned, Instructor. Indeed. Vatheian materialized from an adjacent chamber, their form rippling with the particular shade of purple that meant barely restrained condescension. The Osuri looked like someone had taken a jellyfish, given it delusions of grandeur, and taught it to hover menacingly at eye level. You will find your charges beyond this portal. 3 juvenile Krell, aged 7 standard months. Their species originates from Krell 4, a death world with triple standard gravity and an ecosystem that considers everything else food. Death world? Mitchell kept his expression neutral, though internally he noted that humans also came from a planet most species classified somewhere between hostile and why would evolution do this? Indeed, highly aggressive fauna, extreme climate variations, tectonic instability that would shatter most civilized worlds. The Krell evolved as apex predators in this environment. Vathecora's color shifted toward orange. Academic explanation mode. They possess remarkable strength, redundant organ systems, and pack-hunting instincts refined across 2 million cycles of selection pressure. Adult specimens mass approximately 400 kilograms and can traverse vertical surfaces using specialized claws. So basically bears. I am unfamiliar with this reference. Large predatory mammals from Earth, omnivorous, protective of young, very good at killing things when motivated. Vathecora rippled dismissively. Your assignment consists of ensuring the juveniles receive adequate nutrition, environmental stimulation, and behavioral documentation. They are the offspring of Ambassador Krell Thak, who entrusted their education to our facilities as a gesture of diplomatic cooperation. You will observe, record, and maintain appropriate distance. These are not companions. They are specimens for study. Mitchell glanced at the reinforced portal. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, he could see 3 shapes moving in the habitat beyond. What happened to the previous cadet assigned here? Reassigned after proving incompatible with the position. Incompatible how? She attempted to implement what she termed play therapy and was subsequently hospitalized for 14 standard days while her exoskeleton regenerated. Vathecora drifted closer, their bulk somehow both insubstantial and oppressive. The Krell cubs interpreted her behavior as challenge display. This is why your species was selected for this assignment. Humans possess remarkable regenerative capabilities for mammals. Should you prove similarly incompatible, the medical inconvenience will be minimal. Ah, there it was. Mitchell wasn't here because of any particular aptitude. He was here because humans were considered expendable enough to risk around juvenile predators, but just conscious enough that injuring him might not constitute a complete diplomatic incident. Understood, instructor. Your datapad contains feeding schedules, behavioral baselines, and emergency protocols. Do attempt to avoid triggering the latter. The cleanup is tedious. With that encouraging statement, Vathecora dissolved back toward the administrative levels, leaving Mitchell alone with his new charges. He approached the portal carefully, studying the habitat beyond. The Vatheians had constructed something attempting to mimic Krell 4's environment. Rocky terrain with multiple elevation levels, artificial vegetation that looked sturdy enough to survive regular mauling, and a small water feature that burbled with forced cheerfulness. Temperature readouts indicated heat that would have been uncomfortable for most species, but apparently qualified as mild for Krell standards. The 3 cubs noticed him immediately. They were, Mitchell had to admit, absolutely adorable in the way that baby apex predators always managed, despite being objectively terrifying. Each stood roughly a meter tall at the shoulder, covered in dense fur that shifted between gray and brown depending on the light. Their faces combined the blunt power of terrestrial bears with something more intelligent, more aware. 6 eyes, arranged in 2 rows, tracked his movement with unnerving coordination. Claws that would eventually grow to 12 centimeters, currently measured a merely concerning 5. One cub, the largest, approached the viewing panel with deliberate steps, The other two hung back, watching. Mitchell pulled up the data pad. According to the files, the large one was designated Juvenile Alpha. The other two were Juvenile Beta and Juvenile Gamma, because apparently the Vatheians believed in efficiency over creativity when naming living beings who'd eventually grow large enough to bite a shuttle in half. Right, Mitchell said quietly, more to himself than the cubs. Let's figure this out. He keyed open the portal's communication system. Sound would transmit, though the Vatheians had assured him the cubs possessed only rudimentary linguistic capability and wouldn't understand complex verbal communication. "Hey there," he started, keeping his voice even. "I'm Mitchell. I'll be around for a while, so we might as well get acquainted." Juvenile Alpha cocked their massive head, 6 eyes focusing with disturbing intensity. Behind them, Beta and Gamma crept closer, curiosity apparently overcoming caution. The datapad beeped. Feeding time in 30 standard minutes. Mitchell reviewed the protocol. Nutrition bars, specifically formulated for Krell physiology, dispensed through automated feeders to prevent cadet-juvenile interaction during high-stimulation periods. Everything measured, scheduled, observed from a distance. The cubs were being raised like laboratory subjects, which technically they were, given this whole arrangement qualified as some sort of cross-cultural educational exchange wrapped in diplomatic niceties. Mitchell looked at the 3 young Krell, then at the sterile feeding mechanism, then back at the cubs. "Yeah," he muttered. "This is going to be interesting." Above him, in the gleaming corridors where instructors discussed pedagogy and strategic theory, nobody noticed one human cadet beginning an assignment. Everyone expected him to fail. The Vatheian education complex continued its eternal orbit, secure in its hierarchies, confident in its methods, certain that sophisticated species understood how the galaxy worked. They would learn otherwise soon enough. Though to be fair, they'd probably classify that lesson as aberrant behavioral data requiring extensive analysis, rather than admit they'd been fundamentally wrong about anything important. Some things were universal across all species: the ability to create efficient killing machines, and the spectacular capacity for institutional denial when those machines started acting unpredictably. 3 days into his assignment, Mitchell committed his first act of institutional rebellion. He gave the cubs actual names. Alpha became Crash, because the youngster had an unfortunate tendency to miscalculate momentum when excited. Beta became Scout, constantly investigating every corner of the habitat with methodical precision. Gamma, the smallest and most cautious, became Whisper, a name that would have been ironic if anyone knew that Krell cubs could produce territorial bellows registering at 80 decibels. The instructors noticed nothing. Why would they? The cubs were specimens. Numbers sufficed for specimens. Mitchell, however, had grown up with 3 dogs, 2 cats, and a remarkably persistent raccoon that considered his family's garage its personal territory. He knew the difference between observing animals and actually seeing them. So when Crash approached the feeding station with obvious hesitation on day 4, Mitchell noticed. When Scout paced the same 3-meter circuit 14 times before settling down, Mitchell noticed. When Whisper refused the standard nutrition bars entirely, Mitchell definitely noticed. "They're bored," he told instructor Vatheian during the weekly assessment. The Osuri's color shifted to that particularly unpleasant shade of yellow that meant tolerating stupidity from inferior species. The juveniles receive optimal nutrition, environmental complexity, and sensory stimulation within established parameters. Boredom is not a relevant factor. They're intelligent pack predators stuck in a cage with nothing to do except eat and sleep. That's the definition of bored. Your anthropomorphization of instinct-driven behavior is noted and dismissed. Continue standard protocols. Mitchell continued standard protocols for approximately 6 hours, before deciding that institutional guidelines could take a running leap off the station's exterior docking port. He started bringing puzzle toys, primitive by galactic standards, just weighted boxes and sliding panels, and leaving them in the habitat during cleaning cycles. The Cubs demolished the first 3 within minutes, but by the 4th attempt, Crash figured out the locking mechanism. Scout and Whisper watched, learned, then worked out variations. The monitoring systems recorded everything. The instructors, reviewing footage with academic detachment, noted tool manipulation behavior and observational learning in their reports. They missed the part where Crash brought the solved puzzle back to the portal window and dropped it directly in front of where Mitchell usually stood, 6 eyes bright with something that looked suspiciously like pride. Week 2 brought the food incident that would eventually baffle xenobiologists across 4 sectors. Mitchell sat in the observation alcove during his meal break, eating something the station cafeteria optimistically called protein synthesis loaf. The Cubs lounged in their habitat, theoretically resting after morning enrichment. Crash suddenly stood, grabbed one of the premium nutrition bars from the feeding station, the one specifically formulated to be extra appealing to Krell biochemistry, and approached the viewing panel. For a long moment, the young Krell just stood there, holding the bar in massive jaws, staring at Mitchell with all 6 eyes. Then Crash dropped it, right against the transparent aluminum directly in front of Mitchell's considerably less appetizing meal. Scout immediately joined in, dragging over another bar. Whisper, after brief hesitation, contributed a third. Mitchell stared at the 3 nutrition bars pressed against the barrier separating them. The Cubs stared back, occasionally glancing at his protein loaf with expressions that somehow conveyed interspecies disgust. "Are you trying to feed me?" Mitchell asked quietly. Crash made a low rumbling sound, not quite a growl, not quite a purr, something distinctly approving. When Instructor Vatheian reviewed the footage, their entire form flickered through 7 colors in rapid succession, the Usuri equivalent of a minor existential crisis. This is aberrant behavior. Predators do not surrender food resources to non-pack members. The juveniles are demonstrating dominance display patterns incorrectly, perhaps developmental delays from captivity stress. Or, Mitchell suggested carefully, they're sharing. Sharing is a cooperative survival strategy, exclusive to species with advanced social cognition. These are juveniles operating on pure instinct. Right. Instinct. Got it. The behavior repeated. Every meal break, 3 nutrition bars appeared at the viewing panel. When Mitchell tried refusing them, Crash grew agitated, pacing and huffing until Mitchell at least acknowledged the offering. The other cadets, when they bothered visiting sub-level 7 at all, found this hilarious. The human was being adopted by oversized predator kittens. How primitively appropriate. By week 3, the Cubs had started following Mitchell's movements throughout the habitat. When he entered for cleaning duty, all 3 would trail behind him, maintaining careful distance but clearly tracking his position. When he worked on equipment repairs, they'd settle nearby, watching with focused attention. When he left, Whisper would make a sound that the monitoring equipment classified as distress vocalization, but which Mitchell recognized as the noise young pack animals made when separated from their group. The instructors observed this with growing confusion, documenting what they termed inappropriate attachment behavior, and discussing intervention strategies during long academic meetings that concluded nothing except that more observation was required. Mitchell just kept showing up, kept treating 3 young Krell like they were people instead of specimens, and kept wondering why that concept seemed so impossibly difficult for the galaxy's most sophisticated species to grasp. He'd find out soon enough, though not in any way the instructors could have predicted. Some lessons couldn't be taught in classrooms. The survival crucible happened twice per cycle, a grand tradition where the Vatheian education complex proved its superiority by throwing cadets into elaborately designed nightmare scenarios, and seeing who emerged with their dignity intact. Previous exercises had included zero-gravity combat simulations, hostile environment navigation, and one memorable incident involving a malfunctioning gravity generator that nobody discussed anymore, except in hushed tones near the medical wing. This cycle's scenario involved a theoretical enemy boarding action. Cadets would deploy throughout Section 9 of the station, conveniently under renovation and therefore expendable if anyone broke something, and respond to simulated hostiles using training weapons that delivered painful but non-lethal feedback. The exercise would test tactical thinking, squad coordination, and the ability to not accidentally shoot your commanding officer when stress levels peaked. Mitchell received his assignment with the rest of his training cohort, a mixed group of species who'd made it clear through 6 weeks of passive-aggressive corridor interactions that humans ranked somewhere between tolerable nuisance and organic furniture. He'd be running communication support, which meant staying relatively safe in the rear, while others got the glory of pretending to save the station. The cubs naturally were secured in their habitat with extra safety protocols. Automated systems locked down, redundant containment fields activated, monitoring increased to constant observation. Nothing could possibly go wrong, which in institutional logic meant something would definitely go wrong, probably expensively. The exercise began at 0900 Standard Time. By 0947, 3 separate systems had failed in ways that shouldn't have been physically possible. First, the training weapons malfunctioned, delivering full-intensity feedback that sent 2 Yethram cadets to medical with actual injuries. Then the simulation parameters corrupted, turning harmless holographic enemies into targeting algorithms that recognized cadets as legitimate threats. Finally, and most catastrophically, a power surge cascaded through Section 9's environmental controls, sealing blast doors and trapping 17 cadets in compartments, rapidly losing atmosphere. Mitchell's squad found themselves locked in a storage bay with oxygen levels dropping and no way to override the door mechanisms. Around them, cadets from 5 different species cycled through various expressions of panic, which looked remarkably similar, despite vastly different facial structures. Terror, apparently, was one of those universal constants that evolution couldn't improve upon. "Communications are down," announced squad leader Thexim, a Mrenthi whose 6-lobed brain was currently firing on maybe 3 lobes maximum. "Emergency protocols are not responding. This is not simulation parameters." No kidding, Mitchell thought, but didn't say. His heads-up display showed 14 minutes of breathable air remaining. The door was reinforced titanium composite, designed to withstand explosive decompression. His training weapon, even at full power, wouldn't scratch it. Above them, in the command center, instructors stared at monitoring screens with the particular expression of beings watching their careers evaporate in real time. Initiating full evacuation protocols would mean admitting the complex's legendary survival crucible had become an actual survival situation. Prestigious institutions didn't admit failures of that magnitude. Better to attempt technical solutions. Surely their sophisticated systems could resolve this minor difficulty before anyone actually died. 3 levels down, in the xenobiology wing, alarms shrieked through empty corridors. The power surge had compromised containment systems throughout the facility. Safety protocols demanded immediate lockdown of all potentially dangerous specimens. The Krell habitat doors, running on a separate circuit that had somehow avoided the cascade failure, remained functional. Crash, Scout, and Whisper stood at the barrier, 6 eyes each focused on the door mechanism. The human hadn't returned. The human always returned at specific intervals. They'd learned his patterns over weeks of observation. But the station smelled wrong now, tasted wrong, felt wrong in ways their sophisticated predator instincts immediately recognized as danger. Crash approached the control panel, the one they'd watched Mitchell manipulate dozens of times. The one with the specific sequence of touches that made the barrier open. Juvenile Krell weren't supposed to have that kind of memory, weren't supposed to understand cause and effect at that level, weren't supposed to be capable of complex problem-solving. The instructors would have been fascinated by what happened next if they hadn't been busy arguing about evacuation protocols and calculating how much paperwork a cadet casualty required. The habitat door opened. 3 young Krell, each massing roughly 80 kilograms of muscle and instinct, emerged into corridors they'd never seen before. And they went hunting for their human. The Krell cubs found Mitchell using methods that would have fascinated xenobiologists if anyone had been paying attention to anything except the unfolding catastrophe in Section 9. They tracked his scent through 12 corridors, 3 vertical access shafts, and 1 maintenance tunnel that technically wasn't rated for anything larger than repair drones. Scout led the way with methodical precision. Whisper followed with cautious deliberation, and Crash brought up the rear, occasionally pausing to demolish any obstacles that seemed insufficiently cooperative. The storage bay door, currently standing between Mitchell and breathable air for the next 8 minutes, presented an interesting engineering challenge. Reinforced titanium composite, triple locked, designed by species who believed sufficient technology could solve any problem. They hadn't designed it to withstand 3 juvenile Krell who'd decided that particular barrier was preventing them from reaching their pack member. The first anyone knew about the Cubs' escape was when something hit the exterior door with enough force to register on structural monitors. Commander Vatheian, currently 3 levels above arguing about evacuation procedures, felt their entire form go pale violet, the Osuri color for experiencing regret about life choices. "The Krell juveniles have breached containment," announced a monitoring technician with admirable calm for someone delivering career-ending news. Inside the storage bay, Mitchell heard scratching. Heavy, deliberate scratching accompanied by huffing sounds he'd learned to recognize over 6 weeks of close observation. "Is something out there?" Thexam asked, because apparently stating the obvious helped when oxygen deprivation affected cognitive function. Mitchell approached the door carefully. Crash? Scout? Whisper? The scratching intensified. A rumbling sound vibrated through the metal. Not quite a growl, not quite that odd purring noise Crash made when pleased. Something in between, something that sounded distinctly like, "Found you, now what?" "Your predator specimens have come to consume us during our final moments," observed Cadet Yethrim, a Yethrim whose transparent biology currently showed stress chemicals flooding through their crystalline circulatory system. How primitively poetic. "They're not here to eat anyone," Mitchell said, though he'll admit later he wasn't entirely certain about that assessment. "They're here because they tracked me." "Predators track prey. You have simply confirmed my analysis." The door shuddered. Whatever the Cubs were doing, it was working. Metal groaned in ways that suggested engineering tolerances were being tested by forces they weren't designed to handle. Mitchell pulled up his datapad, accessing what little system control remained functional. The door mechanism was fried, but the Cubs didn't know that. They just knew barriers could be broken if you applied the right combination of strength and stubborn determination. "Can they actually breach that door?" Thexam asked. "Honestly, I have no idea, but I know they're trying." Mitchell studied the schematic, thinking about 3 young Krell who'd spent weeks watching him solve puzzles, manipulate equipment, work through problems. Who'd learned by observation, because that's what intelligent pack predators did. "Everyone, back against the far wall," he ordered, using the tone he'd learned worked with both military cadets and determined animals. "When this door opens, stay calm and don't make sudden movements." 6 minutes of air remaining. The door shuddered again, and this time something gave. A gap appeared at the base, maybe 5 centimeters. Crash's claws appeared in the opening, followed by Scout's, then Whisper's. They pulled with coordinated effort that spoke to either remarkable instinct or remarkable intelligence. depending on which explanation made observers more comfortable. The door shifted. 10 centimeters. 20. Enough for pressurized atmosphere to begin equalizing. Enough for 3 juvenile Krell to squeeze through, which they did with efficiency that suggested they'd planned this approach rather than stumbling into it. Crash entered first, immediately locating Mitchell and positioning between him and the other cadets. Scout and Whisper flanked, creating a protective formation that any military instructor would have recognized as textbook defensive positioning, if they could have gotten past the cognitive dissonance of watching it executed by creatures they'd classified as instinct-driven specimens. "Hello, friends," Mitchell said, quietly, extending one hand slowly. Crash bumped a massive head against his palm, then turned to assess the other cadets with 6 eyes that suggested anything threatening their human would regret that choice extensively. The evacuation, when it finally came 20 minutes later, found all 17 cadets alive and protected by 3 juvenile predators who'd apparently decided that pack bonds transcended species classifications. The after-action reports were magnificent examples of institutional doublethink. Instructor Vatheian spent 6 hours documenting aberrant behavioral patterns suggesting unprecedented cross-species social bonding, without once using the word friendship. The complex's director issued statements about valuable data regarding Krell cognitive development, while carefully avoiding any mention of the catastrophic system failures that necessitated the rescue. But Mitchell noticed something interesting during the mandatory debriefing sessions. The instructors asked different questions now, not about protocols or procedures, but about how he'd interacted with the cubs, what he'd done differently, why creatures supposedly operating on pure instinct had demonstrated tactical thinking, problem-solving, and emotional recognition that rivaled species with triple the brain mass. "You treated them as equals," Vatheian finally said, their color cycling through shades that suggested intellectual discomfort. "Not as specimens, not as subjects for observation. You acknowledged their consciousness." "I acknowledged they were people," Mitchell corrected, "just not people like us." 3 cycles later, the Vatheian education complex quietly revised its xenobiology protocols. Words like specimen and subject disappeared from official documentation, replaced with terminology that suggested maybe, possibly, the galaxy's most sophisticated species had been getting something fundamentally wrong about intelligence, consciousness, and the definition of civilization. Crash, Scout, and Whisper continued their education at the complex, now with expanded habitats and enrichment programs designed by someone who actually understood what intelligent social predators needed. They still brought food to Mitchell during meal breaks, a behavior the instructors had stopped trying to classify as aberrant and started recognizing as what it actually was: care between pack members. The irony, lost on most but appreciated by certain observant humans, was that it took 3 young Krell to teach the galaxy's most prestigious military academy what sophistication actually meant. Not technological advancement or telepathic abilities or crystalline biology, just the simple recognition that intelligence came in forms that didn't match your preconceptions, and sometimes the most evolved choice was treating others like they mattered. Even if they couldn't operate a datapad or debate military theory, or understand complex political structures. Especially then, actually. The cubs never did learn to appreciate protein synthesis loaf, though. Some things transcended even the most profound interspecies understanding.